June days of 1941, the eve of the Great Patriotic War, caught me in the post of Chief of the 5th Frontier Red Banner Detachment of the Leningrad Frontier District. The Frontier Detachment was carrying out a combat mission to protect the Soviet state border on the Karelian Isthmus north of Leningrad. At the same time, I was entrusted with the duties of the representation of the Border Commissar of the Soviet Union to resolve certain issues arising on the state border with the neighboring state in my area. After graduating from the Franz Military Academy, I perceived my appointment to the post of the Chief of the 5th Frontier Sestroretsk Detachment as a great trust. After all, the detachment, established on February 25, 1924, had a glorious history, was famous for the combat feats of soldiers and commanders. From the first days of service in the detachment, I was lucky to work next to a wonderful man, the head of the NKVD Border Guards of the Leningrad District, Commander Grigory Alexeyevich Stepanov. He knew our section of the Soviet-Finnish border very well. It was in these places immediately after the decree of the Council of Labour and Defence of the Young Republic of Soviets on the establishment of a separate border corps of GPU troops. He began his service as a company commander. The borders were guarded by a system of cordons.
There were no more than 7 soldiers in a cordon, the commander told me. Therefore, we had to serve 14-16 hours a day. At first, there were no separate buildings to house the cordons. It was good if in some places we managed to equip an old bathhouse or a barn. In 1923, in the village of Muromitsy, not far from Peskov Lake, the first house for the cordon was built. It was a holiday. We did not get much food at that time. We had to do our own hunting and fishing.
Among the border guards, Grigory Alexeyevich recalled, either illiterate and even illiterate, malnourished, sleep-deprived, poorly dressed soldiers selflessly carried out their service, and in the deaf evenings by the light of a lucina, there were not smoker stacks everywhere. Young people learned literacy, read newspapers, books, studied weapons and military science. The fate of the company commander himself, a native of a poor peasant family from the village of Zavod, lost in the forests and swamps between Pskov and Novgorod, in many ways resembled the fate of his men, with the only exception that he began his military service back in 1916 in Finland. In June 1917, a freshly minted non-commissioned officer found himself in revolutionary Petrograd, forever choosing for himself the road indicated to the poorest people by the Bolsheviks, and he had no doubts about the choice of which side to fight on when the Civil War broke out. 22-year-old assistant company commander of the Novgorod Defense Regiment is elected a delegate to the 7th All-Russian Congress of Soviets. There, on December 5, 1919, Stepanov first saw Lenin, heard his fiery speech. "Still of the mind lies the main strip of civil wars which we fought," said Vladimir Ilyich, "and ahead the main strip of that peaceful construction which attracts us all, which we want, we must create, and to which we will devote all our efforts and all our lives." More than once, Grigory Stepanov repeated these words of the great Lenin as an oath, and soon, during the suppression of the Kronstadt mutiny, he proved his loyalty to the revolution. For the heroism shown in the battles, he was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. Ahead of him awaited new battles and fights with unkilled gangs during further service on the hot borders of the 30s in Central Asia and Transcaucasia. Before being appointed chief of the border troops of the Leningrad district in 1939, Grigory Alexeyevich managed to command a school in Moscow for 3 years, which now became the Higher Border Command School, to work as head of department of the main directorate of the border troops. Talking with me, Commander Stepanov generously shared his rich experience, knowledge of the specifics of the Soviet-Finnish border, told in detail about the combat path of the detachment. In the first years of the Soviet power, a lot of courage, patience, perseverance, cheekist skill was required from border guards to track down and neutralize spies, saboteurs, smugglers. Soldiers in green caps often had to face the most experienced agents of foreign intelligence, capable, it would seem, to emerge victorious from the most dangerous positions. This is what British intelligence considered its agent Sidney George Riley. But in the summer of 1925, this invincible English spy was neutralized as a result of skillfully developed by F.I. Dzezorinsky and V.V.R. Menshinsky Chekist operation, known as the Trust. It is no exaggeration to say that one of the heroes of this operation was the head of the Sestroretsk border guard station Taiwo Vyaka. It was he, under the direct supervision of Stanislav Adamovich, Messing for a long time led on the border difficult and deadly dangerous invisible secret duel with a whole group of master spies and saboteurs, which the Finnish border guards transported to Soviet territory. But each of them on Soviet soil, thanks to Taiuvaha, fell under the close observation of Soviet chiefs. As a result, the Chekists were able to uncover numerous secret spies in various Soviet cities, and in particular in Leningrad, to prevent and disarm counter-revolutionary plots prepared by emigrant organizations of Russian White Guards and foreign intelligence. Courageous Soviet border guard Taiwo Vaiko was awarded the Order of the Red Banner for the brilliantly performed task. The border guards and other outposts of the Sestrorets border guard detachment did not know a single hour of calm. It was a really hot border. On November 19, 1925, the border guard on duty at the outpost Bedny, risking his life, detained the Estonian-Finnish spy Tasso. The investigation of Tasso's case helped to reveal and then to liquidate the whole spy organization. For his excellent service and courage in apprehending the spy, border guard Bedny was awarded a personalized silver watch. For a long time, the border guards of the Sestroretsky detachment were hunting for a spy, a certain Polku. The master scout was sneaking in where he was least expected. But no matter how cunning the spy, he eventually failed to escape retribution. One day, Pompolite Lembelovsky Commandant Alexander Rossisky, checking the service of outfits, decided to inspect a section of swampy path on which no one dared to walk. It was here that he met Pox. Intruder raised his parabellum. The Russian returned fire and wounded the enemy spy, but Poku still managed to break through to our rear. For more than a week, knowing neither sleep nor rest, the border guards searched for the spy. They inspected barns, yards, attics, probed haystacks, covered with secrets the exits from villages. The persistence and experience of the border guards allowed them to succeed. On the outskirts of one of the villages under surveillance, a man appeared who identified himself as a local resident. The clothes he was wearing were not the way Alexander Rossisky remembered and described, but the border guards paid attention to the right hand of the local resident. It was hanging with a whip. This gave away the upon inspection. It turned out that the hand had recently been pierced by a bullet sent to the spy by Alexander Rossisky. The spy failed to escape. At the interrogation, Poku confessed that after the wounding he hid at an acquaintance of a widow. During the search of the apartment found 2 parabellums and 100 rounds of ammunition for them. Thus, the border guards not only neutralized the spy, but also exposed his assistant, the mistress of the spy's cell. Many feats were accomplished by the soldiers of our unit. A fight with a detected border violator is always a feat, because the enemy, as a rule, is well armed and cunning. Being detected, strive to destroy the border guard, but our fighters did not think about the danger. In the fight with the enemy, they were energized by one thought: to prevent a spy saboteur to get on the Soviet soil, to detain and neutralize him. In October 1927, the country was preparing to solemnly celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution. The Jubilee session of the All-Russian Central Executive Committee of the USA was decided to be held in Leningrad, where, under the leadership of Lenin in October 1917, won the armed uprising. Leningrad residents were joyfully preparing for the anniversary celebrations. The leaders of the party and government, numerous guests came to the city. The enemies wanted to mar the bright, joyful holiday of our people with sabotage and murders. Enemy intelligence prepared the transfer of 4 terrorist bandits across the border into Soviet territory. Such is the peculiarity of the State Border Protection Service that, as a rule, border guards have to fight the enemy in small numbers, and often a border guard has to start a fight alone, no matter how many enemies there are against him. So it happened this time. The 4 terrorist bandits were confronted by one Soviet border guard, a young fighter Andrei Korobitsyn. It was Korobitsyn who became a national hero on that day, October 21, 1927. Only a little more than half a year had passed since in February Andrei came to the outpost of the Sestrorets frontier detachment with a new recruit from the Vologda village of Kurekino.
At the outpost, Korobitsyn persistently mastered all the intricacies of border service, and by spring became one of the best fighters, and in the fall he first detained 2 saboteurs, sneaking into our rear at night.
On the night of October 21, the head of the outpost sent Korobitsyn to the outfit with the order to travel along the sentry trail and conduct open mobile surveillance on the site of 213 to 215th border posts. At the end of the dark night, the border guard was especially attentive to everything that could arouse suspicion. As he approached a dilapidated shed, he suddenly noticed that 4 armed men had jumped out of it. Seeing the border guard, they raised their mazas and began to surround him, and one of the bandits shouted, "OJ, surrender, surrender, or we will kill you." Korobotsin did not answer, but, raising his rifle, opened fire. One of the intruders fell, but Andrei also felt a searing pain in his leg. He was wounded and sank to the ground. Overcoming the pain, he continued to shoot, so the bandits began to retreat toward the border. They dragged one of their own in their arms. At the very borderline, the saboteurs increased their fire. One after another, 2 more bullets dug into Korobotsin's body. When comrades from the outpost came running, the saboteurs had already crossed the border rivulet and fled, carrying the wounded accomplice. As it turned out later, it was a hardened spy Pekkanen.
This is how Andrei Korobotsin died at his combat post, defending the inviolability of the
The Presidium of the All-Russian Central Executive Committee on July 5, 1937, adopted a resolution to rename the Kurakino Village Council of Sierdzhizhensky District of the Northern Region into Korobotsinsky Village Council, and its center, the village of Kurakino, into Korobotsino. Books have been written about the hero Andrei Korobotsin. Poems and songs have been written about him. New generations of border guards learned and are learning from the heroic deed of Andrei Korobotsin. His image inspired soldiers in the formidable years of the Great Patriotic War. The outpost named after the hero, from year to year, shows excellent results in the service to protect the state border in combat and political training. Hero border guard Andrei Korobotsin is buried in the Sestroretsk Cemetery, and on October 20, 1957, on the border of the former Sosnovsky and Vemsevolsky districts of the Leningrad region, on the place of the former state border of the USSR, where Andrei Korobotsin fought with the enemies, was opened a monument. On the grey granite are carved the words, "Here on October 21, 1927, border guard Andrei Korobotsin made a heroic feat, defending the border of the USA." The Soviet government highly appreciated the successes in the combat activity of the frontier units of the northwestern border. On December 14, 1927, the Presidium of the Central Executive Committee of the USSR awarded diplomas to a number of units of the border troops, on the occasion of awarding them the Revolutionary Red Banner on the day of the 10th anniversary of the VK, or among them, and our frontier detachment, border guards of the Northwest, carrying in difficult conditions their responsible service, always felt the attention and care of the party organization and all the workers of Leningrad and the region. On the initiative of a candidate member of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the All-Union Communist Party of Bolsheviks, the first secretary of the Leningrad Regional Committee, and the Northwest Bureau of the Central Committee of the All-Union Communist Party of Bolsheviks, Sem. Kirov, June 7, 1928, in Smolny held a meeting of Soviet, Party and Komsomol workers of border districts of the Leningrad region and representatives of units of the border district, which discussed the strengthening of communication between the local population and border guards, the assistance of local Soviet, Party and Komsomol organizations to the fighters in green caps. Sergei Mironovich set at the meeting the task to establish a close relationship between the population and the border troops, which would ensure the inaccessibility of the border zone for enemy agents. M. Kirov repeatedly visited our troops, met with border guards of the Karelian Isthmus. Having come once to one of the outposts of the Sestroretsk border guard detachment, ESM Kirov asked to show how the direct guarding on the border is organized. Together with the head of the outpost I, Solovyov, he walked along the sentry clearing. Here, as Solovyov later recalled, he and Kirov had such a conversation. "You know, friends," said Sergei Mironovich, "in my opinion, you guard the border is a little weak. At a distance of a kilometer from each other, or even more, stand on their post sentries, and in the middle of the void." "You're wrong, Sergei Mironovich. Neither last year nor this year there were no unpunished violations of the state border in our area, so we are guarding the border reliably." "That's good. But let's say that we are not here, and the intruder is lurking on the other side of the sentry clearing and is waiting for a convenient moment to run across it. You say he won't run away?" "Of course he won't. First of all, it's not easy to get to the sentinel clearing. And secondly, even if he does, there'll be people who catch him even beyond the Sentinel clearing. I'd like to see those men. If you insist, we can see them. The chief of the outpost gave a signal, and in front of Kirov suddenly appeared fighters' border guards, who were in secret and well camouflaged. SM Kirov was very pleased with the actions of the border guards, but at the same time he remarked, "And yet, friends, so far you are mostly helped by your legs. Unfortunately, we are poor, so we can't use equipment, but we have it, and it is very reliable. But we have to wait until we get rich." "If we have to, we'll wait," Soloviev agreed.
But that's not right. You know your difficulties better than anyone else, and you should firmly raise questions and demand help.
His conversation gave important practical results. Soon a high-voltage line was laid and all outposts and commandants' offices received plenty of electricity. And in 1935, a great work on construction of fortifications in this area and technical equipment of outposts was started. The soldiers in green caps respected and loved Sergei Mironovich Kirov, a faithful disciple of Vladimir Lenin, a proletarian revolutionary, an inspirational tribune, a fiery propagandist of Marxism, at their request, soon by the order of the Ogpupu on October 18, 1931. The first secretary of the Leningrad Regional Committee of the All-Union Communist Party of Bolsheviks was approved as an honorary Red Army officer of the 5th Sestroretsk Frontier Detachment. The border guards also had a great friendship with the local population. Collective farmers of border villages actively helped to protect the border, bravely participated in the fight against border violators in their detention. At the request of border guards, collective farmers helped to cut sentinel paths in the woods on the border, performed other works. In turn, the border guards were always ready to help the collective farmers. Strengthened ties with border guards and workers of the city of Lenin. At outposts and in detachments, frequent guests were writers. Our famous Leningrad writers Vsevolod Vishnevsky, Mikhail Slonimsky and others created many stories and essays about the everyday life of the frontier troops, their heroes. The great respect that the workers of the Leningrad region had for the border guards is also evidenced by the fact that in 1938, among the deputies of the Supreme Soviet of the RSSR of the First Convocation, elected by the workers of the Leningrad region, was a border guard, Belat Serkovets.
In 1936, the country celebrated the 15th anniversary of the NKVD border troops.
The Soviet people gratefully honored the heroes' border guard, noting their merits in protecting the borders of the motherland, vigilance, merciless struggle against the class enemy and heroism, as well as achievements in combat and political training. The Central Executive Committee of the USSR awarded orders to a number of parts of the border troop. Among those awarded the Order of the Red Banner was Sestroretsk's frontier detachment of the Leningrad Frontier District. Meanwhile, the intrigues of the imperialists on our northwestern borders intensified. The Finnish reactionary government, encouraged by Hitler's Germany, not only did not meet the peace-loving efforts of the Soviet government, but persistently demonstrated its irreconcilable hostility to the USSR and its disinterest in normal good neighborly relations. Since the end of 1935, reactionary circles in Finland began to provoke armed conflicts on the border. These were far from harmless shots. On January 7, 1936, in the afternoon in the area of Ordno, in the section of our detachment in the area of border post No. 162, a detachment consisting of Spirin, a squad commander, and Bryukhanov, a Red Army man, was shot at from the Finnish side. Spirin was seriously wounded and died soon after. The fire from the Finnish side was conducted by people dressed in military uniforms. As I was informed by Commander Stepanov, since 1937 German submarines began to appear in our territorial waters in the Gulf of Finland, and Finnish airplanes began to systematically invade Soviet airspace. Here is just one of the numerous documents of the main Directorate of Border Guard on the violation of the state border in the northwest. The document is dated September 22, 1937. September 21, 1937 at 14 H5 56 Min. On the site of the outpost Kaldadovsky spill of the Sestroretsk Border Guard detachment in the area of the border post No. 95 at an altitude of 2,000 am, an unknown spy plane flew from Finland to the territory of the USSR at a course from west to northeast. Having penetrated into our territory for 200 meters, the plane returned to Finnish territory at the same point. At 3 p.m., The same airplane in the area of border posts No. 9798 at an altitude of 200 m again flew over to our territory, and having reached an altitude of 2000 m disappeared. The airplane was fired at by our border guard with 2 rifles.
At 15 o'clock, on the section of the outpost of Termalovo-Sestritsky frontier, detachment in the area of frontier posts No. 100-11 at an altitude of 2,000-3,000 meters, at a course from west to southeast from Finland to the territory of the USR. 2 unknown airplanes flew over and disappeared in the clouds.
Comdiv Stefanov said that, taking into account the current situation, the Communist Party and the Soviet government took a number of measures to strengthen the border troops on the northern and northwestern sections of the state border. The troops were strengthened with necessary equipment and armament. Border detachments, in particular, received automobiles. Air sledges, high-speed boats were provided with radio communication. As the further events showed, the provocative fuss made by the Finnish military with the full approval of imperialist patrons was connected with the general aggravation of the situation in the international arena. On September 1, 1939, Nazi Germany attacked Poland. In response, 2 days later, England and France declared themselves at war with Germany. The ruling reactionary circles in Finland had long been planning to create a Greater Finland by tearing away significant territories from the Soviet Union. In order to achieve their goals, the reactionary government of Finland, contrary to the national interests of the people, with the help of the imperialist states, intensively prepared for war. The Finnish military turned the Korean isthmus into a bridgehead, allowing to quickly concentrate and secretly deploy a large group of troops aimed at Leningrad, which was 32 kilometers from the border. One of the most important economic, cultural and political centers of our country was thus under the threat of artillery fire from long-range guns. No less danger was hanging over Kronstadt, the main base of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet. All this, of course, could not but cause anxiety among the Soviet people. In October 1939, the Soviet government offered Finland to conclude a pact of mutual assistance. Having received a refusal, the Soviet Union offered to move the Finnish border from Leningrad to several dozen kilometers to the northwest. By way of compensation, the USSR was ready to cede twice as much territory of some areas of Soviet Karelia adjacent to the border. If the Finnish government had been sympathetic to these proposals of its neighbour, the impending military conflict could have been avoided. Former Finnish President Uu Kekkonen stated in September 1963, "When now, more than 20 years later, we put ourselves in the position of the Soviet Union, in the light of Hitler's attack on the Soviet Union in 1941, the concern that the USR had and should have had for its security in the late 1930s becomes clear." But the ruling reactionary circles of Finland reasoned and acted differently. Hoping for the active assistance of the imperialist states, they deliberately inflamed the situation. The unbridled provocations of the Finnish military, the refusal of the Finnish ruling clique to strengthen the security of the USSR and Finland by peaceful means on the basis of good neighbourly relations, forced the Soviet government to denounce the non-aggression treaty with Finland and to break off diplomatic relations with it. To this, the Finnish military responded with new provocations on the border near Leningrad. During the whole October 1939, from the frontier outposts, there was information about movements of Finnish troops to the cordons. At that time, I had an opportunity to meet and accompany K.E. Voroshilov and the chief of the border troops of the district, Commander H.O. Stepanov. Then I also had my first meeting with a member of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the All-Union Communist Party of Bolsheviks, the first secretary of the Leningrad Regional and City Party Committees, Andrei Alexandrovich Zhadov. He visited us in our detachment in the fall of 1939. Then I had a memorable conversation with him. In the first minutes, in case of the beginning of hostilities, Masuzanov V.E., your border guard should seize the railroad bridge over the Sestra River. According to available data, it is mined from the Finnish side and at any moment it can blow up. Think, consult with the soldiers and commanders, how to avoid the loss of a very important operational highway. How important advice gave me Andrei Alexandrovich. I realized after a meeting with border guards of Outpost No. 19 who were assigned to protect half of the bridge adjacent to our territory. Your outfits always meet Finnish guards in the middle of the bridge, Comrade Major, reported the squad commander Minenko, and it is rare that the guards don't ask us for fag. Apparently, they're a little short of smokes, so we can quickly take them by the sides if necessary. We know how to watch, too. We know where the explosives are planted, where the cable to it stretches, where the main and spare infernal machines are located. And at 8 a.m., on November 13, 1939, when the Soviet artillery started talking, all units of the Sestroretsk Red Banner Frontier Detachment came under the operational subordination of the 7th Army. At 8:30, the outposts of the detachment, together with the Red Army units, crossed the border. Border guards had the task to capture the enemy cordons. "And how long will it take you to capture the bridge?" I asked. "No more than 3 minutes," Lieutenant Suslov, the head of the outpost, answered with confidence. "I take all responsibility for the operation."
Consult with the soldiers and commanders. I remembered Zhdanov's admonition. It turned out that these were not just words spoken in passing. I remembered it many times during the development of the most complex combat operations.
Briefly, I will say that the capture of the railroad bridge across the Sestra, subordinates of Lieutenant Suslov, Sergeant Minenko, Red Army men Gorbanov and Lebedev brilliantly implemented. I watched the actions of daredevils from the forward observation post. It was an overcast morning. Visibility was poor. A 30-40 centimetre layer of wet loose snow, lying on the fields and in the forests, made it impossible to go on skis, and it was extremely difficult to move without skis. The enemy mined wire barriers, created quite a few minefields and covered many of them with fire. After the Soviet artillery hit, the enemy had to retreat at a number of cordons, covered by fire. However, where he took refuge in pillboxes and bunkers, he resisted stubbornly. Thus, the combat group headed by the chief of the 3rd Outpost, Junior Lieutenant Gvozdev, had to force the river Vinsayuki. The border guards moved to it and lay down under a hail of enemy bullets. Only after our machine guns and handheld machine guns silenced the enemy, the border guards crossed the river knee-deep in the cold water and soon turned around at the cordon. The Shyatskarovцы set fire to it and themselves huddled in the neighboring house. The chief of the outpost sent a group led by Junior Lieutenant Stave to bypass the cordon, and he and machine gunner Liadsky got closer to the houses and opened effective fire. The enemy found out that he was bypassed and hastily retreated. Soldiers of the Sestroretsk Frontier Detachment acted on the front more than 180 kilometers wide on the difficult wooded terrain, and everywhere they fought selflessly, attacked the enemy fearlessly. By 1450, they took over 19 enemy cordons and 1 border guard station, although the enemy put up strong resistance. By this time, 17 outposts of our detachment had completely fulfilled their tasks. Soon the same reports were received from 4 more, and only at Outpost No. 8 near the village of Lipoli, the battle dragged on until 21.0 on December 1, 1939. I would like to note the courageous and proactive actions of the shock groups of the 1st, 6th, 12th, 13th, 19th and 20th outposts.
In a telegram received at the headquarters of the detachment on December 2, 1939, Deputy Chief of the NKVD Border Troops of the USSR Kombriga Polonov and Chief of the Political Management of these troops, Divisional Commissar Mironenko, congratulated the fighters, commanders and political workers with the successful completion of the combat task on the Korean Isthmus. The personnel of the Border Guard Detachment, said the telegram, showed devotion to the motherland, selflessness, courage, resourcefulness, heroism. The command of the frontier troops of the NKVD of SRT give the conducted operation a rating of excellent. Having captured the enemy cordons and thereby rendered active combat assistance to the Red Army units, the frontier troops were given new combat tasks: to vigilantly guard the new US estate border, the rear of the active army, to fight against enemy reconnaissance and sabotage groups.
The personnel of the 5th Frontier Detachment was very proud that its actions were highly appreciated by the command. On the uniforms of many of our soldiers sparkled orders and medals. I received my first government award, the Order of the Red Banner. When the guns fell silent, I had the opportunity to take part in the work of a mixed Soviet-Finnish commission to establish a new border between the neighboring countries. Especially memorable were meetings and conversations with the representative of the General Staff, Kombrig Alexander Mikhailovich Vasilevsky, who headed the commission from our side. There were enough difficulties at that time. The new section of the border had to be studied to the smallest detail and to organize its security, to ensure reliable communication. In addition, it was necessary to equip premises for outposts and commandant's offices. In some places we had to live in tents and build new buildings. Meanwhile, the enemy was not slumbering. His intelligence intensively continued its work, trying to use good knowledge of the terrain to penetrate into our rear. Detained spies and saboteurs tried to deceive the border guards, pretending to be people offended and dissatisfied with their government, unemployed, returning refugees, etc. Shots rang out almost every day on the border with Finland. As the Soviet representative for resolving border incidents on the Karelian Isthmus, I met almost weekly with the Finnish border representative. Such mission meetings were held alternately on Soviet territory in the town of Enso and Imatra. In connection with the increasing provocative actions on the border by the Finns, especially in May and June 1941, the Soviet Border Commission was often personally headed by the head of the Leningrad Border District, Lieutenant General Grigory Alekseyevich Stepan. Finnish representatives during the work of the commissions behaved, to put it mildly, undiplomatically. We were informed the chief of the Finnish General Staff, Ginenrach, worked well with the German General Staff and Prime Minister Ruti on the anniversary of Finland's independence, speaking at a banquet. I am quite sure that we will conquer our own again. Finland made active preparations for military action. At the end of 1940, German troops arriving on ships from Germany began to be stationed in the northern part of Finland, Lapland. Free passage to the port cities located on the coast of the Gulf of Bothnia was in the border areas of Finland adjacent to the Soviet Union. A restricted zone of 130-140 kilometers was created. The deconstruction of roads to the border with the USSR was intensified. Since June 10, 1941, Finland carried out a secret mobilization and began to transfer troops to the Soviet border. The civilian population moved from the border areas deep into Finland. The activity of enemy agents became noticeably more active. In the first days of June, groups of Finnish and German officers engaged in reconnaissance began to appear near the Soviet border. In the middle of June 1941, Finnish troops were seen moving towards the border from the border towers near the town of Enso. Artillery and tanks were taking up firing and starting positions. On Saturday, June 21, one of the border violators was brought to the detachment headquarters. He refused to answer questions. Through his teeth, he hissed only 2 words: tomorrow. The received intelligence data with exceptional responsibility was double-checked at the outposts and in the detachment. Everything said that from hour to hour we could expect a treacherous attack on our border. We, the commanders of border units and military formations, on whom depended the inviolability of the borders of our homeland, did not sit idly by. In the language of documents, I want to tell the reader about the measures taken to repel the enemy's attack on the site of our detachment.
On June 21, 1941, after a meeting in my office in Enso, together with the Deputy Chief of the Detachment on Political Part, Regimental Commissar Ziablikov, and the Chief of Staff of the detachment, Major Okunovich, we assessed the situation and came to the following conclusion.
Singan Finnish troops are completing the concentration of the operational offensive grouping, the most probable directions of the main blows. In Imatra, Etola, Keksholm, Lappeenranta, Viborg, that is in the strip of our 5th Frontier Red Banner detached in the strip of our neighbour on the right. In the direction of Lahdenfosjas or Tavola, the enemy is most likely to take the offensive in the coming hours.
We know that according to the plan of covering the Enso line, Vuosi River, it is envisaged to advance units of the 115th Rifle Division of Major General V.F. Konkov from the 23rd Army.
In the morning of June 21, 1941, the command of the 115th Infantry Division informed us, "We have an instruction to be in full combat readiness in places of permanent deployment." Based on this assessment of the situation, I issued the following order to the detachment. Said to continue to strengthen the protection and defense of the state border of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, especially strengthening the protection and interaction with the neighbor on the right in the direction of Etola, in the area of the town of Enso and on the left flank in the direction of Viborg. 2. The personnel of the outpost, free from direct service on the state frontier line, to take up and defend combat positions in the area of the outpost on the night of June 22, 1941.
3. Commandant's Office and Manoeuvring Group to occupy reserve command posts and areas, paying special attention to reliable, stable communication and control with outposts and border guards along the front and bypass communication from the
4. The headquarters of the Frontier Detachment, headed by the Chief of Staff of the detachment, Major Okunovich, from the town of Enso on the night of June 22, 1941, to move to the area of the reserve command post southeast of the town of Enso, and by 24.0 on June 21, 1941, to organize communication and control with the commandant's officers, outposts and units of the Red Army stationed in the band of the Frontier Detachment, as well as with the district and the center. 5. Iron Regimental Commissar Zyablikov with the task force, with means of communication with the troops. The district and the center remain at the former location of the headquarters of the border detachment of the city of Enso. 6. On the night of June 22, 1941, the families of servicemen to take to the rear, having allocated for this purpose the appropriate vehicle. During the night of June 22, 1941, fulfilling the received order, the frontier outposts in groups of at least 5 border guards covered the main likely directions of the enemy's attack. The gaps were covered by mobile sentry posts. After 3 o'clock in the morning on June 22, reports from the 9th and 12th outposts about numerous violations of our border by German planes began to arrive. Finnish border guards left the cordons of Pernujärvi, Kantu and Raikala and withdrew to the rear. Finnish and German regular troops appeared at the border guard station and began to equip the initial area for the offensive. At 5:00 a.m. on June 22, hundreds of German fascist guns suddenly poured their fire on our frontier outposts and areas prepared by the district's engineer sapper units for long-term fortifications. The heaviest fire was concentrated on the area of the frontier outpost located on the heights on the northern edge of the town of Enso and the headquarters of the Frontier Detachment. Several large-caliber shells hit the main headquarters building of the border detachment. After a short but strong fire attack, the enemy attacked our border outposts on a wide front supported by artillery and mortar fire. Since the personnel of outposts, commandant's offices and headquarters of the detachment on the night of June 22, 1941 were withdrawn from the outposts and occupied the main and reserve positions, we had no losses from the enemy's fire at that hour, and all his attacks were repulsed. In the Karelian Isthmus in the following days, the combat actions of the border guards were limited to repulsion of attacks of small enemy units seeking to penetrate into the Soviet territory. During June 29, 1941, the situation changed dramatically. All along the border of the USSR with Finland, German-Finnish troops, with the support of aviation, tried to break through the strip of protection of the state border of the US air. They concentrated their main efforts on the sections of Kuorjärvi, Elisenvaara and 5th Border detachments. In these directions, up to 2 or 3 battalions of the enemy with the support of tanks entered the battle. On our section in the morning of June 29, 1941, 2 battalions of the enemy, with tanks, somewhat squeezed the border outposts, and after a 3-hour battle occupied the town of Enso. I think that the best evidence of courage and bravery, loyalty to duty of the defenders of the Soviet frontiers, will serve as a chronicle of the first 12 hours of fighting near the town of Enso, compiled from the reports of the headquarters of our frontier detachment. By a swift blow of the frontier guards under the command of the chief of the outpost, Senior Lieutenant B. Bayakin, the enemy, having suffered losses in men and having left on the battlefield 2 tanks, 2 machine guns and 70 magazines for them, was knocked out of the town of Enso. Border guards of the 8th outpost of the 5th Frontier Detachment, Degopetsky, Karlukin, Vorontsov and Tolstoshka, being part of the outpost, fought a hard battle with the enemy, who was attacking the outpost with 5 tanks. Despite the brutal fire, crawled up to the tanks, and with a successful throw of grenades put 2 of them out of action. The chief of the 5th outpost, Junior Lieutenant Kudyakov, being surrounded with the outpost by the enemy force up to 2 battalions, by skillful actions and brave maneuver came out of the encirclement, which at 11:00 a.m. on July 1, 1941. The enemy with 2 companies made an attempt to seize Enso, but was again thrown back behind the border. In those days, the headquarters of the 5th Frontier Detachment received one after another reports about courage and steadfastness of soldiers in green caps. I was especially excited by the report about the feat of Sergeant Andrei Busalov. I knew this junior commander who had distinguished himself in the battles with the White Finns in 1939-1940. Later, for his excellent service, I gave him a leave of absence with a trip to his homeland, but Busalov refused encouragement. In the detachment became known the content of his letter to relatives. "Shared this month to visit you, but probably will not have to due to the international situation," reported the sergeant. "The situation is such that it is impossible to go on vacation. You can see from the newspapers that the war is expanding. It is already around us. But they don't touch us yet. But if they do, we'll tear their heads off. So work quietly in your fields. Your peaceful labor we will reliably keep." In the hour of severe trials, Komsomolets Busalov, not in words, but indeed proved his great love for the motherland. On June 30, 1941, the outpost, where Sergeant Busalov served, received information that a battalion of the enemy broke through at the site of the neighboring outpost. At night, along the forest paths, the machine gun squad, commanded by Busalov, stealthily approached the besieged. The accurate fire, opened in the flank of the enemy, forced him to retreat. Senior political officer in Chishchin, shaking hands with Busalov. "Well done, well helped by the fire." Several hours passed. The enemy gathered forces and again attacked the frontier guards. But this time, too, the accurate fire of Sergeant Busalov's machine gun drove back the attackers to their original positions. Now the enemy concentrated the main fire on the brave machine gunner, but it was not so easy to suppress Busalov's machine gun. The frontiersman chose a firing position between large boulders and maneuvered all the time. When the enemy opened heavy fire, he took cover behind one or another boulder.
Attack followed attack. Being wounded several times, Busalov fought until an enemy bullet pierced his Komsomol ticket, which the brave border guard kept near his heart.
Andrei no longer heard how on the right flank, overlapping the rumble of battle, rolled a loud hurrah. A group of border guards, headed by Senior Lieutenant Gurkov, arrived from the detachment and rushed into a bayonet attack. For courage and bravery shown in this battle, 20 border guards were awarded battle orders. And awarded the Order of the Red Banner, Sergeant Andrei Fedorovich Busalov is still in the ranks. His name is forever enrolled in the lists of his native outpost. On the night of July 1, 1941, north of Lake Ladoga, the enemy, with the forces of up to 2 reinforced infantry divisions, went on the offensive in the direction of Ladenfojai in the junction of our 7th and 23rd Armies, but met stubborn and active resistance of the frontier units, left flank units of the 168th Infantry Division of the 7th Army, and right flank units of the 142nd Infantry Division of the 23rd Army. In the first days of August 1941, especially strong battles developed in the area of Sortavala, where fierce enemy attacks were repulsed by the 168th Infantry Division, and in the area of Lyshden-Pokcha, where units of the 142nd Infantry Division and 198th Motorized Division fought. The combined group of border guards under the command of Colonel S.I. Donskov courageously fought north and west of Keksholm. The enemy repulsed all our counterattacks in the direction of Hitola, Elisenvaara. Units of the 2nd Finnish Army Corps broke through to the middle part of the Vuoksa water system. On August 11, 1941, the enemy went on the offensive all along the Korean Isthmus. After forcing the Vuoksi in the direction of Vyborg, the 4th Army Corps went on the offensive. By the middle of August 1941, for the troops defending Leningrad, there came a critical moment. From the south, the German Army Group North, which had broken through the Luzha fortified position on the flanks, was advancing on the city, and from the north, the Finnish army, which was developing an offensive on the Karelian Isthmus. The enemy troops were coming closer and closer to Leningrad. The enemy, having made a breakthrough west of Lake Ladoga in the direction of Keksholm, came to the middle reaches of the Vuoksi River, and on August 23, 1941, it was possible to strike at the flank and rear of our Vyborg grouping. South of Vyborg, the enemy landing force cut the seaside railroad and highway leading to Leningrad. In this situation, the Military Council of the Leningrad Front, with the knowledge of the Stavka, allowed the commander of the 23rd Army, Lieutenant General M. Gerasimov, to withdraw the Vyborg grouping of troops in a southerly direction to the boundary of the former Mannerheim Line on August 28, 1941. This decision could not be realized. The enemy managed to tightly close the escape routes, and parts of the Vyborg grouping had to be taken from the Koivisto area by ships and barges to Leningrad. On August 31, Finnish troops reached the area of Terioki. On September 1, 1941, the Military Council of the Leningrad Front made a decision to the troops of the 23rd Army to occupy the line from the Gulf of Finland along the Sestra River to Lake Ladoga. Army troops in hard fighting began to repel attempts of Finnish troops to break through to Leningrad. With the beginning of hostilities, I was appointed head of the rear guard of the 23rd Army, taking into account the peculiarities of the first period of the Great Patriotic War on the Karelian Isthmus in the 23rd Army Band. Border outpost detachments, in cooperation with field troops of the Red Army, continue to defend and protect the state border of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. For the purpose of the most complete interaction with the Army units, I was promptly subordinated to the border units operating in the 23rd Army Strip. This obliged to organize a clear interaction of border guards with the troops of the first echelon of the Army. Being directly in the first echelon of the Army Field Command, my small headquarters had constant communication with the leadership of the association, its headquarters and political department. Frontier units were in the most acute areas, and I was always timely and fully informed about the true situation on the border, and especially in the most important direction of combat operations, which was personally reported to the commander and a member of the Military Council of the Army. During the battles, in coordination with the command of the border troops of the Leningrad District and the Military Council of the 23rd Army, I regrouped the border units in the interests of the operational situation.
There was even a case when I had to make an independent decision to transfer the Vyborg Motorized Rifle Regiment of the NKVD to the Kitola area in order to prevent the enemy's breakthrough in the direction of Kexholm in cooperation with the detachment of Colonel Donskov's border guards.
Fighting shoulder to shoulder with the Red Army soldiers, border guards in those formidable days covered their battle banners with unfading glory, being operationally subordinated to the 23rd Army. The Elisenvire Frontier Detachment, consisting of 6 outposts of the 2nd and 3rd Commandant's offices, was transferred to the defence of Karlati Station, where there was an army supply station with huge stocks of shells, mines, grenade ammunition, and various weapons. During 10 days, the units of the detachment fought continuous battles against 3 brigades, and in these battles defended the supply station, giving the opportunity to take out all army supplies. Soldiers and commanders of the 5th Frontier Detachment, together with units of the 43rd and 123rd Infantry Divisions, defended and firmly held the line of the state border for over a month and a half. In fierce battles, courageous border guards dealt crushing blows to the enemy. The losses of the enemy in July only killed over 800 soldiers and officers. On August 15, the command of the 23rd Army assigned the detachment the task to ensure the withdrawal from the encirclement of the 265th Infantry Division, to suppress the enemy who had broken through in the area of Kirk, Razel, and to stop its further advance. As a result of 5 days of fighting, the detachment successfully accomplished this combat task. The subsequent combat actions of the detachment covered and ensured the withdrawal of the 142nd and 198th Infantry Divisions, the withdrawal from the encirclement of the 181st Infantry Regiment, 577th Artillery Regiment, 704th Artillery Regiment, 146th Heavy Tank Regiment, 53rd Infantry Regiment.
For valour, courage and bravery, 76 men, commanders and political workers of the detachment, were presented to the government award.
At noon on September 2, 1941, when the headquarters of the 23rd Army was moved to a new area southeast of the Sestri River, the operational duty officer gave me a telegram with an order to arrive at Smolny, where the headquarters and the Military Council of the Leningrad Front were located. It was already dark. The moonlight barely penetrated through the crown of the pine forest to the road slits along which our old squad MK slowly made its way to the south, to the burnt Kivenana. From here we could clearly hear the sounds of battle. We decided to go back and turn to Stary Belustrov at Manila in order to get to Sestroretsk by the shortest way along the river bank. As soon as we reached the northeastern outskirts of the town, we were blocked by a patrol of several men in civilian clothes with rifles on their shoulders. Opening the car door, a stooped worker, in whom I recognized one of the oldest masters of the Sestroretsk tool factory named after S. P. V. Voskov, stretched out and loudly ripped. People's Militia Outpost, Comrade Colonel. You don't have to show your documents. We know the deputies of our city council by sight. I asked if there was any information about the enemy. The fascists are already on the northern outskirts, said the worker. Just now the levels and our militiamen repulsed the last attack. It took 5 minutes to get to the city party committee. The city was awake. In the streets, women, old men, children were building defences. They passed almost next to the fence of the factory, which was working at full capacity. In the city party committee welcomed me cordially. Secretary of the city committee, Alexei Ivanovich Baranov, explained the situation in a nutshell, having preempted our units retreating to new frontiers. The enemy captured the settlements of Terioki, Kuokhyla, Rayakovsky, broke into the northern outskirts of Sestroretsk. There are no our troops in the city, except for some small units. Militias are on the defence of the town.
We ask you, Andrei Matveevich, said the secretary of the city committee, to help push the enemy back from the northern outskirts of the city and organise the defence. You will have at your disposal the city's militia units, the backbone of which is made up of factory workers.
I replied that I was ready to help organise the defence, but I had orders to come to Smolny. Comrade Zhijanov asked me to address him with any questions day and night, replied the secretary of the city committee. Now we'll settle everything. Andrei Alexandrovich Baranov picked up the telephone receiver and spoke. You know the situation in the area of our city. We have Colonel Andrei Matveevich Andreev here. He is at the disposal of the military council of the front, in connection with the difficult situation in the city. The city party committee of Sestroretsk asks the military council of the front to entrust him to command the city's militia units, to clear the northern outskirts of the city from the enemy, to organize its defense. After a short pause, the tube was handed to me. My comrade Andreev, EU. I heard Zashtanov's voice. We exchanged opinions with Comrade Voroshilov here. The military council of the Leningrad front instruct you to temporarily take command of the people's militia units of Sestroretsk to help organize the defense of the town. Tomorrow, a separate detachment of sailors of the Baltic Fleet will arrive in Sestroretsk. With their arrival, go to Smolny. Having received the order of the military council of the front, I immediately went along the Sestri River to the area where Sestroretsk was covered from the north by the main frontier, the old fortification. On the outskirts of the town I met the militia, commanded by Anatoly Ivanovich Osovsky, a member of the All-Union Communist Party, who before the war had been in charge of the Karelian Isthmus Cinematography Trust in Terioki. Osovsky reported that, according to the scouts, a column of enemy tanks and infantry was moving towards Sestroretsk. We will organize an ambush, Comrade Colonel here. Make us so to Anatoly Ivanovich on the map. Having received permission, Osovsky put 26 militiamen on the truck and drove towards the enemy. I have Anatoly Ivanovich's story about this raid, recorded from his words and published in Leningrad newspaper.
2 kilometres from Sestroretsk, we met several fighters who confirmed that half a kilometre from here are moving tanks and infantry, and we heard their firing from guns and machine guns. I ordered the militiamen to turn in a chain and, sending forward a reconnaissance team, to move forward. After walking about 400 metres through the woods in the area customs between Olila and Kurort, we saw an enemy tank standing on a hill near the road, which was firing guns and machine guns.
Having arranged people along the road, we with the fighter Bolshakov crawled 50 metres forward and lay down behind a broken tractor. Then, having noticed the best shelter, a small sand pit near the road, we crawled there. We were not noticed, and, firing all the time, the tank approached very slowly and cautiously. In a few minutes, a fighter Severin came crawling to us. Without me, Commander, the case will not turn out.
When the tank came 20 metres closer to us, I shook an anti-tank grenade and, having let the Hitlerites to 10 more metres, jumped out of the pit and threw it under the left caterpillar. There was an explosion. The tank with a torn caterpillar turned to us sideways. Severin gave me a second grenade. I threw it. It fell near the tank, tore the right caterpillar and damaged the drive wheels. It was a medium German TIE tank. Besides me, Bolshakov and Severin threw a grenade each, but the tank's machine guns continued to fire. Looking out, I noticed that the hatch of the tank opened. It turns out that at that time 2 of the 5 tank crew members were trying to escape. One of them was killed by a burst from the automatic rifle of the fighter who was covering us. I successfully threw ARGD-3 grenade into the open hatch, after which the cannon and machine guns in the tank became silent.
Soon another tank appeared 100 meters away from us and opened machine gun fire. At the same time, from the right flank appeared a third tank, which also fired and tried to go around but ran into a swampy area, turned back, and behind the tanks moved infantry, 40-50 people. We opened fire with rifles and him with automatic rifle. The enemy chain lay down. I immediately crawled to my arm. There were about 40 of us, as the place in the chain was taken by 15 men from those who retreated and met us. Meanwhile, the tank opened fire with guns and machine guns, and the infantry with rifles. But the enemy fire did us no harm. Our position on the slope of the heights was quite successful. The firefight lasted more than 2 hours. I knew that on the right and left flanks we had no neighbors. I knew that behind there was a place where tanks could pass only by 2 roads, because there was a swamp. So I decided to take a detachment there. We moved to the area of Rusty Groove, immediately entrenched and prepared to meet the enemy. A few hours later I was summoned to Colonel Andreev, who informed me that the regular Red Army units had occupied the frontier along the bank of the Sestra River and set a task for our detachment. The colonel told the glad tidings, our detachment A. Zhdanov announced gratitude for initiative and courage in battle. It seems that this story of a participant of the battles near Sestroretsk in early September 1941, testifying to the courage and fortitude of the militia, yesterday's workers, who barely had time to get weapons, well shows how in the absence of organized defense by our troops, militiamen stood up to defend the city of Lenin and in some areas managed to stop the enemy at the approaches to it. Leningrad, the name of this city for me always sounds exciting, makes my heart beat faster. Here I was born behind Nevskaya Zastava in October 1905. My father, Matvey Andreevich, the son of a former serf and native of Smolensk province, worked as a turner. My mother, Praskovia Nikitichna, as a weaver. We lived very poorly, huddled in a barrack. I vaguely remember my 5 brothers and sisters. All of them died of diseases. I was lucky, probably, only because in 1920 my father decided to go to his homeland, to Smolensk province, where the Committee of the Poor allocated him a plot of land from the former landlord's lands. My childhood was spent in St. Petersburg, in the unique period of revolutionary storms that shook the whole of Russia, departing from Sestroretsk to Smolny on the night of September 4-5, 1941. I could not help but remember the sailors' fires at the Tauride Palace, to which we boys used to carry firewood with delight, and the Red Guard patrols in the streets. Leningrad now had much in common with the October time of 1917. The city again put on a soldier's overcoat, acquired a stern military look. A few hours ago, Hitler's long-range artillery once again shelled residential neighborhoods. In the flames of the burning fires were visible broken buildings, with empty apartments on display.
Autumn leaves could not cover the cratered streets and sidewalks. Fists clenched with rage. It seemed that the whole multi-million city, lurking in the night darkness, clenched its teeth in an unyielding determination to endure and...
Here was Smolny, with the monument to Elik behind the open-work fence. You can imagine my excitement when, having shown my documents to the sentry, I walked to this building, where the great Lenin worked in the historic days of October. On the staircases and in the corridors it was quiet and calm. Concerned civilians and military personnel are going about their business, it seems to me, in an emphasized leisurely manner.
I was not detained long in the reception room of the front commander. The door opened wide, and I, typing a step, entered the large office. Toward me, from behind a long table adjacent to the desk, piled with topographic maps, rose Marshal of the Soviet Union K. Voroshilov, A. Zhdanov, a member of the military council of the front, standing at the window, watched my presentation, and then came up and shook my hand.
Sit down. Andrei Zhatanov pointed to the chair nearest to him. Marshal Voroshilov stood next to him. I thanked him for the invitation and remained standing. Comrade Andreev? Said Zhdanov very calmly. The military council of the front appointed you commander of the 43rd Rifle Division of the Red Banner. Its personnel is mainly made up of Leningraders, hardened working people. There are many communists among them. This is one of the best, one of the most combat-ready formations of the front. Maps of the division, continued K. Yeah, Vorshilov, gesturing me to the map spread out on the table. After persistent and bloody battles on the Karelian Isthmus northeast of Vyborg withdrew to the area of Koivisto to the Gulf of Finland and are being transported to Leningrad by ships and barges. At this time, the main forces of the division are concentrated in the city, in the Red Barracks. You should take command of the division without delay. By 4 a.m., railroad echelons will be delivered to the platform of the Finland station. Personnel and materiel to load and depart at the disposal of the commander of the 23rd Army. By the end of the day, as the echelons arrive, take up the defense in the area of Lake Lembelovsky, in cooperation with the units of the fortified area to prevent the enemy's breakthrough to Leningrad. Is the task clear to you?
The task is clear. All I had to do was to thank you for your high confidence. Zhdanov and Voroshilov in turn hugged me tightly, wished me good luck in combat. From such unexpected attention, I was quite confused and touched. But here Andrei Alexandrovich helped me out. Glancing at his watch, he suddenly said,
It's past midnight, Clement Efremovich. It's time for us to have supper, and Andrei Matveyevich will refresh himself with us before we go. Wait for me a moment. He went into his study and returned with a small black pouch tied with a ribbon. I saw exactly the same pouch in Voroshilov's hands. What did they keep in them? My curiosity got the better of me. In the canteen, everything became clear. In Leningrad, a strict card system was introduced for all foodstuffs. In black bags, Zhdanov and Voroshilov kept bread and galettes issued to them for several days in advance. After a very modest dinner, Andrei Alexandrovich opened his pouch and put a piece of bread left on the plate, and then took out a packet of galettes and handed it to me. For your journey, Andrei Matveyevich, he said with such a kind smile that I had no words to refuse the unexpected gift. After all, you won't be on the payroll right away?
This was another lesson I learned from Andrei Alexandrovich Zhdanov. Having served for many years in the army, holding high command positions at the front and in peacetime, I always tried to make sure that my life was not a secret for my subordinate. Such an approach to personal life, if a leader of a large scale has it at all, cancels all reasons for rumours and gossip.
Having visited the front headquarters, I received brief information about the compound which I began to command. The 43rd Rifle Division is a cadre division. During the war with the White Finns in 1939-1940 years, for the breakthrough of the Mannerheim Line was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. Since 1940, it was stationed on the Karelian Isthmus northeast of Vyborg. With the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, it firmly held the border of the state border in its defense line. With the breakthrough of the enemy in the Sortavala direction to the Vuoksa water system, following the order of the commander of the 23rd Army, the division, moving away from the state border, concentrated southeast of Vyborg with the task to carry out a counterattack in the direction of Vuor's army against the broken-through group of the enemy from Keksholm to the Vuoksa water system. The division's counterattack was poorly prepared. The units met strong resistance. At the same time, the enemy, with the forces of the 18th Infantry Division, reinforced by a tank brigade, dealt a strong blow to our open left flank. Generally, parts of the division suffered significant losses, and the commander of the compound was severely wounded, which could not but affect the combat effectiveness of the compound. Having no firm control, parts of the division began to withdraw to the Gulf of Finland in the area of Koivisto. With the onset of darkness crossed the island. Artillery regiments, which occupied firing positions to the south in depth, on the initiative of their commanders managed to withdraw to new lines. As part of the new additions to the division units came a lot of communists from among the Leningrad workers, about whom A. H. Zhdanov told me. This allowed to sharply raise the level of party political work in the connection. At the first hour of the night, I, with my orderly Mikhail Brodsky, did not immediately manage to find the Red Barracks. As soon as I asked the night patrols where they were, they began a thorough check of documents, which took a lot of time. Still, we arrived safely.
The duty officer who met me reported that the headquarters of the 43rd Red Banner Rifle Division, and some of its units were indeed temporarily stationed here, and the rest were on their way. Artillery regiments in firing positions in the defence strip of the 23rd Army, of the commanders of the headquarters and parts of the division. Except for him, there almost all commanders. Leningraders and the command allowed them until morning to visit their families. When asked what combat task the division had received, the duty officer answered thoroughly and reported what had already been done. Though not without inconsistencies. The first echelon must leave at 5 o'clock in the morning, and the bulk of the senior staff of the headquarters, units and subdivisions released in the city until 6 o'clock. All attempts to notify the commanders have not yet yielded results. The city is large. There are no cars. Old addresses were often invalid, as the families of many commanders in connection with the ongoing evacuation in the city were in other places.
It was time to get nervous. When I asked what was done except for notifying the command staff, the duty officer reported, temporarily until the arrival of commanders in their positions appointed sergeants. They are mostly cadres, have combat experience and with the task will cope. Rise at 2 o'clock. Performance in an hour. At 4.0 landing, the first echelon at 5.0 will depart. And at 4.30 on September 5, 1941, the trains for the first echelon were delivered to the platform of the Finland station. I was quite surprised. The whole echelon had only class cars. I can't remember the name of the young commander from the operational department of the division headquarters, who, noticing that I was very anxious, immediately handed me a formation note, in which the number of personnel, weapons and ammunition was specified by units and subdivisions. The personnel had rifles, a small number of handguns, and a few machine guns. The rifle regiments had only a few battalion and regimental mortars and radio stations, all other armament of the division, except for artillery. 2 divisional regiments had been lost in previous battles due to one or another circumstance. The rear of the division, together with the artillery regiments, had managed to withdraw, and at this time were concentrated in the area of Lembolovo. Such a formation note did not make me feel any better. The landing of the personnel was organized clearly. On that warm September morning, I watched how the commanders arriving from the city did not go from all sides, but flew to their units, their echelons, wagons. Many of them could not find their loved ones. Some found, instead of their homes, burning ruins, learned about the death of mothers, wives, children during the artillery shelling. These people were the embodiment of hatred for the enemy. Their every word about what they saw and heard on the streets of their native city provoked anger in the soldiers, called for revenge. More and more echelons approached. Soldiers and commanders silently went to them. In their firm and confident step felt irresistible strength. Power in their eyes was confidence in the victory of the right cause. Many of them lost loved ones. Relatives, the enemy stood on the outskirts of the great city of Lenin, but they walked proudly. Although many eyes were full of tears, but they were not tears of weakness, not tears of despair, but tears of grief, for which the enemy had to pay dearly. The route of our journey was short. It took only a few hours, and the first echelons at the final station. It is a small passing track, about 10 kilometers southeast of the Lake Lembolovsky from the junction. It is a short walk to the front edge of our defense, created in the pre-war time along the boundary of the state border of the Soviet Union in 1939. Fire structures of the frontier were kept in full combat readiness. The enemy, bypassing the long-term firing installations, in some places cut into the front line and captured some parts of the first trench. Some of the long-term fire points had been fighting for many hours in encirclement, including the so-called millionth pillbox, which covered the main exit from the area of Lembolovsky Lake. The fascists tried to blow it up several times, but the calculation of the pillbox continued to fight heroically. In such a difficult, tense situation, when the battle was going on all around, echelons of the division unloaded and right from the start battalions, companies and platoons rushed to the aid of the levelers. The enemy did not expect and did not assume that the 43rd Rifle Division, which the day before yesterday had fought southeast of Vybor and withdrew to the area of Koivisto, would appear on a new site. The enemy trembled and rolled back under the blows of rifle regiments that had time to enter the battle, supported by a massive fire of artillery. The fortified Lembolovsky district, with its long-term firing structures and combat calculations, withstood a fierce battle with the enemy, and now, with the arrival of units of the 43rd Infantry Division, became twice as strong. The situation on the Karelian Isthmus in the 23rd Army Band during September 1941 stabilized. All attempts of the enemy in some directions to cut into the defense of our troops were not successful. For our part, we made separate private strikes with a limited task. In the end, the opposing sides, not having sufficient forces, limited their activities to reconnaissance searches and combat actions to improve the outline of the front line. In 1967, at the 31st kilometre of Priozerskoye Highway, on the bank of the Miratovka River, the Memorial Lembonovskaya stronghold was built. It is located along the line where on September 6, 1941, the units of the 23rd Army of the Leningrad Front, border guards and sailors of the Baltic Fleet stopped the enemy. Military fate ordered so that I commanded the 43rd Infantry Division until October 24, 1941. Before I could really study the personnel, I was urgently summoned to the front headquarters for a new assignment.
And here I am again in the Smolny, in the same office in which on September 4, 1941, I was received by comrades K. A. Vorshilov and A. Zhdanov. I introduced myself to Major General Ivan Ivanovich Fedyuninsky, acting commander of the Leningrad Front.
General Fedyuninsky I saw for the first time. Above average height, tightened with belts, he gave the impression of an experienced commander, who neither in words nor in gestures there is nothing superfluous. Everything is thought out, weighed in advance. The general's speech was often interrupted. Then he looked at the topographical map with the situation on the table, then went to the window. It was felt that Ivan Ivanovich was greatly concerned. Yes, there was something to think about. The Supreme Command headquarters, in accordance with the current situation, required active actions to save the population of a city of many millions. For this purpose, it was necessary to seize the MGA station and to liberate from the enemy the railroad on the section Leningrad-Volkhov. On October 20, 1941, our troops attacked the enemy positions from the east and west. In some areas, they pushed the Nazis but did not achieve serious successes. On the crossings across the Neva River in the area of Nevskaya Dubrovka, fascists were firing strong artillery and mortar fire. There were not enough ferries to transfer tanks and infantry escort guns. Regiments of the 86th and 265th Infantry Divisions managed to transfer to the Nevsky Patch at the cost of heavy losses. In the middle of October, the Nazis launched an offensive in the Tikhvin direction, seeking to completely close the blockade ring around Leningrad and join the Finns on the Svaya River near Lodenoy Pole. This would deprive Leningrad of the only communication through Ladoga and sharply worsened the situation of our troops in the northwestern theatre of military operations. Hitler and Mannerheim, having broken their teeth with frontal strikes from the north and south, decided to strike in the direction of the Svaya River to create a second ring of encirclement of Leningrad and the bony hand of hunger to strangle the heroic defenders of the city. At the same time, the enemy launched a general attack on the capital of our motherland, Moscow. Having introduced me to the operational situation, General Fedyuninsky finished.
By decision of the Military Council of the Leningrad Front, you, Colonel Andreev, are appointed commander of the 86th Rifle Division. You will receive your combat task from the command of the Nevsky Task Force. The actions of your division should be bold, decisive and energetic. The battle is to be conducted in special conditions. Forcing the water barrier, capture and expansion of the bridgehead.
With this admonition, I set off on the road. On the old lady's MK, together with the driver and the ordinarian, we jumped over the Litini Bridge, past Vysevolsky, and turning south into the village of Koltushi. The buildings of the famous laboratories, where physiologist Ivan Pavlov worked, were orphaned among the trees that had shed their leaves. The road, having bypassed a small forest, turned to the barrier, and in a few minutes we hugged Colonel N.V. Gorodetsky, Chief of Staff of the Nevsky Task Force. Together with him, we experienced a difficult time of fighting on the Karelian Isthmus, often met at the headquarters of the 23rd Army. Gorodetsky immediately got down to business. By decision of the Military Council of the Leningrad Front, the troops of the Neva Task Force, "Yes," said the colonel, using the bridgehead on the left bank of the Neva River in the area of Moskovskaya Dubrovka, captured on the night of September 20 by units of the 115th Infantry Division of General Konkov and the 4th Marine Brigade of General Nenashev, have the task in cooperation with the troops of the 54th Army, advancing from the east, to break the blockade of the city, to eliminate the bottlenecks of the Nazis, relying on the area of Schlisselburg. By a blow in the direction of the MGA station to liberate the Kirov Railroad on the section of Leningrad, Volkhov, This is a vital necessity for Leningrad, its population and the troops of the front. For the fascist grouping, who continued Gorodetsky, which has reached Ladoga Lake near Schlisselburg, there is a real danger of encirclement. We are separated from the 54th Army by a narrow neck 12-16 kilometers wide. Your 86th Rifle Division, Andrei Matveyevich, in cooperation with the 20th, 265th, and 10th Rifle Divisions of the group, is advancing in the direction of one Gorodok, Sinyavino, where it is expected to meet the troops of the 54th Army advancing from the east. The enemy is trying to throw our crossed units into the Neva. In short, summarized Gorodetsky, there is no more difficult situation. Now it is the hottest point of the front. Later, from the mouth of my old colleague on the Karelian Isthmus, Major General V.F. Khiankov, I learned in more detail about the events that unfolded here, when, on the night of September 20, 1941, units of the 1st Echelon of the 115th Infantry Division, which he commanded, forced the Neva River and captured on its left bank bridgehead, which became known in the history of the Great Patriotic War as the Nevsky Patch. In September, Hitlerites tried several times to cross the Neva River near Nevskaya Dubrovka in order to close the blockade ring around Leningrad on the Karelian Isthmus. However, they failed to do it. The Soviet troops who were on this line steadfastly defended their positions.
The 115th Infantry Division was exhausted by continuous Nazi attacks. However, the units maintained a high fighting spirit. Our soldiers were not going to be limited to defence only. It was decided to force the Neva at night and seize a bridgehead. Hitlerites least of all expected such boldness. Several variants of the crossing were offered. General Konkov decided to carry out the forcing without artillery preparation. Risky, but more chances to achieve surprise.
In the 1st Echelon was a battalion of the 576th Rifle Regiment, commanded by Senior Lieutenant V.P. Dubik, a brave, tactically competent officer. The battalion was tasked to force the Neva River, seize the bridgehead in the area of Moscow-Dubrovka, and ensure the crossing of the main forces of the division. The night sky was raining in the fall. This greatly facilitated the actions of paratroopers. The noise of the rain contributed to camouflage when launching on the water crossing facilities. In addition, was carefully checked the equipment of personnel, fitting equipment.
The calculation for surprise was justified. The battalion secretly crossed to the left bank and suddenly attacked the enemy.
The enemy, realizing that the 1st Echelon would be followed by other units, brought down on the brave men the full force of fire. However, this did not stop the soldiers of the front battalion of the 638th Rifle Regiment, who, following the example of their neighbours, also began the crossing. Together with the 638th Regiment, a battalion of the 4th Marine Brigade of the Baltic Fleet crossed the Heel. Our troops were firmly entrenched on the small coastal area, initially stretching 2 kilometers along the front and 1 kilometer deep. This piece of land was scanned and shot through by the enemy. However, the courage and bravery of the Soviet soldiers were indomitable. Soon the whole task force was on the bridgehead. During a month, the 115th Infantry Division and the 4th Sailors Brigade fought hard. The enemy suffered heavy losses. At the most important moment of the battles for Leningrad on this site were constrained significant forces of Hitlerites, designed to storm the Sikh, 4 infantry and 1 airborne division, artillery, tanks and aviation. In addition, the Nazi command was forced to delay the dispatch of tank corps to the Moscow direction. In the headquarters of the NOG, I was already waiting for a representative of the division's management, Assistant Chief of the Operational Department, Senior Lieutenant I. Eisenstadt. With him, we went to the Neva River cross. The river was about 1 kilometer away when we stopped the car and took a forest path. Good pine trees used to grow here, a place for mushrooms, blueberries and cranberries. The workers of the local paper mill and their families used to spend their vacation days in this forest. But now it's a thicket. There are bomb and shell craters all around, not a single surviving tree. The path ended further on. We went along the trench, not full profile. The trench came to the edge of the Neva water. Some distance from the trench there was a gap for 3 or 4 men. We jumped into it one by one. Dusk was fading early in October. On the opposite bank, slowly, like a bonfire of old twigs, the battle was breaking out. The bridgehead, intertwined with fiery traces, was becoming more and more like a red-hot piece of metal, on which the hammers of cannons were silently hammering. All our mariners on the right bank of the Neva were under enemy observation, and consequently under well-adjusted artillery and mortar fire. The mirror of the water was additionally shot, pierced by flanked machine gun fire from the right from the neighbourhood of Arbuzovo, and from the left from the area of the 8th Gres. Senior Lieutenant Eisenstadt, without wasting time, introduced me to the situation. He reported competently, in clear military language. Right in front of us, Moscow Dubrovka, from it remained only scattered bricks. The front edge of the enemy passes, the northern outskirts of Arbuzovo, further along the road in the direction of the northwestern outskirts of the first city, and rests on the edge of the Neva water. On the right flank, Arbuzovo, on the left, 8 Gres. In the centre, between sand pits, can be seen crossroads of dirt roads. We call it Spider. It is perfectly shot by the enemy and our artillerymen and mortars. All try to bypass it. In the centre, in the direction of the Spider, comes the 20th Rifle Division of Colonel Ivanov. On the right flank can be seen the remains of Arbuzovo. For its northern outskirts are fighting parts of the 265th Rifle Division of Colonel Buavets. Our 86th Rifle Division on the left flank, directly against us, is advancing in the direction of 1st Gorodok. From the neighbouring wharves the crossing began. Individual boats skipped 500 metres distance in 10-12 minutes. The enemy took almost every boat in a firing fork. Shells and mines were bursting from behind, from the front, from the right, from the left. "It's time for us to cross," said the senior lieutenant. He called someone in the thickening darkness. An elderly fighter appeared. His uniform was slouching on his slim shoulders. It was obvious that he had never worn a military uniform before. Glittering glasses in gilded thin-rimmed glasses, the fighter said in a pleasant voice. "Comrade Colonel, please wait 5 or 6 minutes. Hitlerites are neat people. They shoot on schedule. Now they are firing at the 2nd crossing, and you and I are in the area of the 4th crossing. They hit the even-numbered crossings, and then the odd-numbered ones." Not 2 or 3 minutes passed, as the fascists unleashed a barrage of fire on the area of our crossing. The slit was reliably sheltering. Our boat was already afloat, and within minutes after landing, in the middle of the river, the enemy, having made a small firing pause, noticed our boat and opened fire again. The boat's chief, the same fighter in glasses, "Yes, and watch. The shells are going to the area of the 2nd crossing, and this series on our crossing. The shells will fall closer to the right bank and much to the right of the course of our boat." Rowers well studied and mastered the nature and the most probable boundaries of enemy fire raids. Manoeuvring the boat then to the right, then to the left, but only forward, we quickly passed all the fire curtains. "You have a good ear," I praised the rowers. "You listen to the trajectory of the shells perfectly," Senior Lieutenant Eisenstadt explained. "So these are our professors. Piano professors of the Leningrad Conservatory, volunteers from the former 4th Leningrad Rifle Division of the People's Militia. Till in July 4, 1941, there was great excitement in the Marble Palace of Leningrad. Here volunteers from the Dzernizinsky district were signing up for the 4th People's Militia Division. It also included volunteers from the Kibyshev district and the city of Kovpino. Workers, employees, teachers, artists became soldiers. One of the battalions was staffed by workers of the Leningrad militia. In the division gathered people of different age, veterans of the revolution, and freshman students. They did not yet know how to properly wield weapons, but they were strong in spirit, ready to die, but not to let the enemy into their hometown. Due to the difficult situation at the front, the division, not yet fully formed, poorly trained, unarmed and insufficiently armed, went to the front on July 20, 1941. Militiamen learned military science in battle from the basics. They learned to wield combat weapons, to build and hold defensive positions, areas and lines, to counterattack directly in battle. The division fought near Kingisepp, broke out of the enemy ring at Volosov and joined our troops near Krespovardisk. From September 1941 to the middle of October 1941, the 4th Division of the People's Militia fought at the line of Uist-Tosno, Pokrovskoye. So command gave a high assessment of the division's combat actions, and when the military council of the front began to prepare an offensive operation in the area of Nevskaya Dubrovka with the forcing of the Neva River, the 4th People's Militia Division was involved in it, which by that time had become a Cadre 86th Rifle Division. That's why the professors of the Leningrad Conservatory in the piano class, who had long been removed from the military register, and whom I met on the Neva, served in it.
Those were the minutes of the baptism of fire. Fountains of water from exploded shells literally surrounded our boat from all sides. Such a baptism of fire was received by every soldier who crossed to the bridgehead.
And here is the left bank, our Nevsky patch. Deafened by the gunshots, it seemed to me that it took a long time to cross the Neva with its fast current. But only 12 minutes passed. Following the Indefatigable senior lieutenant, I made a jump into the gap. Another throw, and we are in the dugout of the headquarters of the operational department of the 86th Infantry Division. This dugout, as I found out afterwards, was one of the most spacious on the patch and had a pyramidal shape. On a roughly chipped table made of humpy wood, a smokestack made of a flattened tin can shone dimly. Next to it lay a map with the operational situation written on it. In the dugout, I got acquainted with the military commissar of the division, Senior Battalion Commissar E.A. Stepanov, and other commanders. Soon another commander, in a Red Army cap and cotton overalls, squeezed through the narrow door. On his side hung a large field bag in his hands, a soldier's raincoat. He could hardly stand on his feet. "Marching to Med Colonel," barely loosening his singed lips, he said. Battalion Commissar Shurov, head of the political department of the 86th Rifle Division. Firmly shaking my hand, he tried to smile, but his lips stubbornly did not want to smile. But in slightly squinted eyes with black circles from insomnia shone a lively, kind light. Thus, in the first minutes of my stay at the bridgehead, I got acquainted with the head of the political department, an old St. Petersburg worker, former secretary of the Dzerzhinsky District Party Committee. Militia Division, which became in the continuous fighting cadre unit of the Red Army, was his blood child. Battalion Commissar on the night of October 20, 1941, was in the first echelon units of the 169th and 330th Rifle Regiments, 46 boats forcing the Neva River near Nevskaya Dubrovka. Together with them on the bridgehead crossed and the political department of the division. The forcing was organized. The main thing, hidden from the enemy. Hitlerites were only disturbing artillery and mortar fire. In the morning of October 20, 1941, after artillery preparation conducted by our 248th Artillery Regiment of Captain Telegin and 386th Mortar Division of Captain Lushnikov, supported by artillery of Nevskaya Operational Group, the regiments of the first echelon of the division successfully attacked the enemy. Hitlerites responded to our attack by powerful fire of hundreds of guns and mortars from three sides, from the 8th Grev, from the Grove Figonea, and the forest near Mostolovo. Then enemy aviation bombed the bridgehead. Everything was covered with black smoke and dust. Our units, despite the heavy fire of the fascists, continued to attack and managed to expand the bridgehead along the front and in depth. Delci were in the forward units of the regiments of the first echelon of the division. They spoke to the Red Army commanders. Political workers urged not to trample on the spot and go forward, expand the bridgehead, the sooner the better. Shurov himself had just visited the crossings, met the last echelon of the 284th Rifle Regiment. At the crossings of the great crowding of people and equipment, strong flank fire from the area of the 8th Grise and Arbuzovo the enemy shoots, literally pierces through the fire of all our fighting orders, and there are no equipped initial lines of attack. Soldiers are hiding in craters from bombs and shells. All this greatly complicates the management of units. Shurov reported the situation leisurely, deafish voice. On the most difficult situations, he spoke calmly, with the deep conviction of a man who believes that the difficulties are temporary and will be, by all means, overcome. There are not enough guns in the combat order to directly accompany the infantry, said the battalion commissar in conclusion of his report. The shortage of shells in the battles for the expansion of the bridgehead hinders us very much. Thanking Alexander Vasilievich Shurov for a thorough report, I listened to the Chief of Intelligence Division Captain Alexandrov, Chief of Staff Artillery Division Major Fisher, Chief of Staff of the division, Major Kozlov suggested that during the night and the first half of the next day to prepare and organize reconnaissance by combat, to reveal the enemy's fire system, to establish the weak and strong points of the defense. Of particular interest was the fire system and enemy defense lines in the direction of the 8th Gres. Having consulted, it was decided to conduct reconnaissance by combat not at night and not in the morning, but at the end of the next day, so that with the onset of darkness to consolidate the captured lines. In the evening of October 26, the reinforced reconnaissance battalion, after a short artillery raid, amicably went on the attack. The companies of the first echelon jumped through the solid fire curtain of the enemy's barrage and broke into Hitler's trench, having engaged in a grenade and bayonet fight. It happens in battle that a well-started attack is choked, so it happened in our right flank reconnaissance company at the 330th Rifle Regiment. Everything seemed to be going normally. From the observation point of the regiment commander, where I was, it was clearly visible how from behind the overpass of the H. Gres the fascists unleashed a barrage of mortar and machine gun fire on the attackers. See a squad, a platoon, and then the whole company lay down. And then, as if from under the ground, rose Battalion Commissar Shurov, in a cape and a cape tent thrown over his shoulders. It was he, with a raised hand, went towards the enemy fire. In a single impulse, fighters went up in attack, successfully completing the reconnaissance battle. That's how I first saw the chief subordinate in action. He did not command. He did not order. His personal example was the most effective and strongest order. It was shameful. Shameful in front of the head of the political department of the division to sit back in the funnels and not go forward to the enemy. Above the river and the patch dominated the gloomy hulk of the 8th Gres, which gave the enemy not only excellent opportunities for observation, but also excellent conditions for equipping firing positions with reliable shelters in underground floors. So, in the depth of the enemy defense, no more than 1,000 meters from the shoreline, stood 2 huge mounds of slag, accumulated over 10 years of the Gres. Battle reconnaissance showed that on them the fascists had equipped machine gun points, perfectly camouflaged them. Ahead of the mounds were 2 deep sand pits, in which the Nazis prepared firing positions of mortars of all calibers. These positions were not viewed and were protected from oblique fire. The enemy blocked the approaches to their mortars, not only by fire from the height of the huge power plant, but also from 2 trestles, closely approaching the building of the power plant and having a height equal to the height of this building. Peat was delivered in tipping wagons along one of the trestles to the station's bunkers on its roof. On the second trestle, the empty wagons were rolled back to the peat mines. Between these 2 trestles stood the enemy's heavy mortars, which fired on the crossings, on the approaches to them, on the water area of the river and on the territory of the patch itself, due to the bend of the Neva River. The river and the Nickel were also shot from the village of Arbuzovo, in the back of our units advancing on the trestle and Gres. During the battle reconnaissance, we took several prisoners from Hitler's parachute division, which had taken Crete in 1940. Battle reconnaissance gave us a lot of valuable information. More than a month had passed since the landing of the first echelon on the heel. During this period, the enemy managed to block the bridgehead well. We, ceaselessly advancing, used up our reserves in parts, and yet the situation and time demanded, and it was vital for Leningrad and for the Leningrad front as a whole to carry out an operation to blockade the city. It was planned by counterstrikes of the 54th, 55th Armies and the Nevsky Task Force to defeat the enemy troops operating in the area of Sinyavino, Emgay, and to restore the land connection of Leningrad with the country. In the days of preparation of the Operation Hitlerites began an offensive in the Tikhvin direction. In such an unfavorable situation, the Sinyavino offensive operation began on October 20. Soon a part of forces had to be transferred to the area of Tikhvin. From the morning of October 29, 1941, planned a general offensive of the entire group of troops of the Neva bridgehead. Our 86th Infantry Division received the task in cooperation with its neighbour on the right, 115th Entry Division of Colonel A. Smanoshin, advancing in the direction of 1st Gorodok, striking from the southwest and along the southern bank of the Neva River to seize the stronghold of the enemy's defence, 8th Gres. On October 29, 1941, after a short fire raid, the division units went on the offensive. During the day of battle, we advanced by 5,100 meters. On the left flank at the river's edge, we captured the enemy trench. The task was not fully accomplished. First of all, the lack of guns and shells to them had an impact. Thus, by meters, at the cost of heavy losses, the legendary bridgehead was extended along the front and in depth. In the first days of November 1941, the fighting continued on the close approaches to Moscow. The Stavka, focusing on the defense of the capital, continued to closely monitor the situation in the Leningrad area and in the Tikhvin direction. It is now known that on November 8, in a conversation with the commander of the Leningrad front, Lieutenant General M.S. Kozin and a member of the Military Council A. Chanov, the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, demanded more active actions and suggested that the command of the Leningrad Front to really engage in the organization of the offensive battle, better use of artillery and tanks. He recommended to select volunteers from different units, to form from them 1 or 2 combined regiments, to explain to them the great importance of the feat that would be required to break the road to the east. The volunteer communist strike regiments were to be the main units of the breakthrough. Major General Panteleimon Alexandrovich Zaitsev, an old communist, took command of one of these regiments. In the 1st Battalion of the regiment were Baltic sailors and border guards. The 2nd and 3rd battalions consisted of volunteers who came to the regiment from the 168th and 281st Rifle Divisions. In those difficult days, when the Soviet people celebrated the 24th anniversary of the Great October Revolution, the soldiers of the 86th Infantry Division were preparing, in cooperation with their neighbors, an individual volunteer communist Leningrad regiment, reinforced by tanks of the 123rd Independent Heavy Tank Red Banner Brigade of Major General V.I. Baranov, to carry out the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. Preparing for the offensive, I carefully surveyed the entire section of the division's defenses, moving from unit to unit along the trenches and passages, crawling under fire from funnel to funnel, talking with commanders, political workers, Red Army soldiers. I was always thinking about how to reduce the effectiveness of enemy fire and, therefore, our losses when the units would go on the attack. What if we bring the trenches closer to the enemy trenches at a distance of 20-25 meters? After all, then the neutral strip can be overcome in one swift rush. Having gathered the regimental commanders, I set them the task to bring the trenches closer to the Hitlerites' front line. Engineering works were carried out at night with observance of all the rules of camouflage. The dugout earth was put on cloak tents and carried to the river bank. Soon my order was fulfilled. In the same days, together with the senior battalion commissar Ivan Alexeyevich Stepanov, we were very seriously engaged in the issues of feeding the personnel. The thing is that the camp kitchens were on the right bank of the Neva, and it was extremely dangerous and difficult to deliver hot food in thermoses from there. Very often fascists sank boats with people bringing thermoses to the left bank. Having consulted with Stepanov, I ordered to ferry the camp kitchens to the bridgehead and dig reliable shelters for them in the steep bank. Snot food began to arrive to the units regularly, and the control of food consumption improved. In blockade conditions, it was of great importance. In the period from November 7 to 10, several artillery and mortar units were transferred to the bridgehead from the right bank. Now a battery of 76 regimental guns, a battery of anti-tank guns, a mortar company of the 169th Regiment, 1 platoon of a mortar division, and a mortar company of the 330th Regiment took up firing positions on the bridgehead. On the night of November 9-10, I regrouped the division units. The 169th and 330th Regiments were concentrated on the left flank of the bridgehead. The 330th Regiment was to advance on the 1st Gorodok, and the 169th in the direction of the 8th Gres. Our artillerymen mortars had many tasks to suppress targets in the area of the 1st and 2nd Gorodok, to destroy the trenches at the edge of the Neva Bank. There was a lot of work for the political staff. The content of Stalin's report at the solemn meeting dedicated to the 24th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution and his speech at the Red Army Parade on November 7, 1941, on Red Square in Moscow was brought to each soldier. On November 11, 1941, the troops of the Leningrad Front in the area of Nevskaya Dubrovka at 9 hours and 30 minutes after a 30-minute artillery preparation went on the offensive. The first echelon of the 86th Rifle Division, 330th and 169th Rifle Regiments attacked the opposing enemy, and breaking his resistance, by the end of the day threw back the units of the 7th Airborne Division of the Hitlerites to the northeastern outskirts of the first town and fought for the building of the 8th State District power plant. Artillerymen of guns of direct support of infantry and battalion mortars worked well this day. Hitler's parachutists, knocked out of the first trenches, fled. Our artillerymen and mortars covered them with fire. The enemy suffered heavy losses. But further that day, parts of the 86th Infantry Division could not advance. The enemy 3 times during the day went into a counterattack, supported by heavy artillery and mortar fire. His counterattacks were repulsed. Our neighbours on the right, in cooperation with the 1st and 2nd Shock Volunteer Communist Regiments, supported by tanks of the 123rd Tank Brigade, advanced to the edge of the forest grove Vigunaya. Despite the heroism of the volunteer communist regiments and tankers, especially distinguished by courage, heroism and skill of the crews of KB heavy tanks, the breakthrough could not be realized. The strike group, consisting of the 168th Infantry Division, 2 volunteer communist regiments, and the 123rd Tank Brigade, was stopped by heavy artillery and mortar fire. Our tanks literally ran into an artillery barrage of direct-fire guns. The Nazi fire attack followed the blow. Only the Kirov armour was able to withstand this hammering. In the following days, after numerous and bloody attacks, the division units, breaking the enemy resistance, captured the first town, and a group of fighters, overcoming the fire resistance, on the shoulders of the repulsed enemy, broke into the building of the power station but could not gain a foothold. It became clear to me that the available forces are clearly not enough to fulfill the task. Having reported my considerations to the command of the NOG, and having received the good, I called the commanders of regiments to the NP and set them a new combat task. In the daytime, to increase the activity of snipers and machine gunners, to track down and destroy the emerging Hitlerites. At night, to send small groups of fighters to the enemy location with the task to exterminate fascists in trenches and dugouts. The main thing is to damage the enemy's manpower. On the Nevsky Patch fought the bravest of the brave, who became true masters of close combat. The Rifle Battalion, under the command of Captain V.I. Yaskin, attacked the Hitlerite trench with a swift rush, and without delay came to the northeastern outskirts of the first town. The road to the advancing was blocked by a bunker. In battle, the best decision is action. Machine gunners of the 1st Platoon of the 2nd Rifle Company, on the order of the commander, opened fire on the embrasure, blinded the Nazis, and the other 2 platoons on the right and left bypassed the breach and hit from the rear, destroying the firing point. The war forced purely peaceful people to thoroughly study military science. Without it, it is impossible to beat the enemy skillfully. Being in the 169th Rifle Regiment, I liked to meet with the commander of the gun crew, Sergeant Voronin, former famous Orenburg tractor driver, awarded the Order of Lenin for success in labor. Voronin was distinguished by a huge physical strength. He bent horseshoes for the amusement of his comrades. In battle, he became extremely calm. We have nowhere to hurry, he explained to his co-workers. There are a lot of enemies, few shells, each shot only in the target. The calculation, which was commanded by Voronin, accurately hit the Hitlerites' firing points and direct fire, and from closed positions. The Russian hero died at the gun when repelling one of the numerous Hitlerite counterattacks in the area of the first town. Days and nights of the Nevsky Patch. What measure today to measure, to understand, to feel what it was for the time. During the day, the defenders of the bridgehead were deafened by the continuous cannonade, and only at night their hearing returned to them. It seemed that they were sitting under a huge bell, and someone was beating it with the constancy of a pendulum. It was a pity that this bell had no walls to protect it from fire. There were on the bridgehead and their own holidays 7 repulsed attacks a day. The joy at the end of such days was double. The enemy suffered heavy losses, and there was hope that tomorrow there would be a lull. The days when artillery shelling continued from sunrise to sunset were considered to be weekdays. Yes, on this small piece of land pressed up against the Neva, they lived, fought, did not retreat. We invented a clever way to hide from artillery fire. We began to occupy those trenches, which we dug closer to the German trenches. We saved ourselves from shells and disturbed the enemy. In the first days of December 1941, the division units were withdrawn to the reserve of the 8th Army. The division concentrated on the right bank of the Neva River in the area of Vegetable Farm and Novi Settlement. It received replenishment and prepared for new battles. The rest of the division was short-lived. On December 20, 169th Rifle Regiment of Major V.S. Smorodkin crossed the Neva River on ice, and in cooperation with units of the 123rd Tank Brigade of Major General V.I. Baranov attacked the enemy in the direction of Abuzovo and Nenskoy.
Despite the brave and decisive actions of tankers and riflemen, the success achieved was minimal. At the same time, Hitlerites on the left flank of the patch, in the area of the first town, pushed the weakened units of our neighbour on the left, the 330th Rifle Regiment of Major S. A. Bluckin went to help him.
Fighting on the flanks of the bridgehead flared up with new vigor and covered the entire beachhead. The Soviet soldiers fought for every fold of the terrain, for every pit dug by an exploded bomb or shell, for every communication line, fire, grenade and bayonet battle was going on day and night. The coming winter complicated the situation of our troops on the Nevsky Patch. Living conditions were determined by the front blockade difficulties. There was a shortage of food, ammunition, warm clothes. Cases of diseases of avitaminosis, scurvy, chicken blindness became more frequent. Nevertheless, no one despaired. We were inspired by the news about the victories of our troops near Moscow. They did it there, we will do it too. That was the thought that possessed everyone. In vain the enemy hoped to win on our hunger, and in vain from his trenches constantly shouted through radio amplifiers on the patch, "Hey Russian, come, I'll feed you, you'll rest, you'll go to the rear, you'll be safe." This fascist weapon did not work, although in general life was very, very hard for everyone. I remember such an incident. From the left bank I once saw a fighter pulling a heavy log to our spot. He was walking slowly, obviously exhausted by hunger, and his load was not light. Hitlerits noticed a lonely figure and started mortar fire. The mines were laid very close. The fighter walked with the log like an ant, with a dried hedge until one mine exploded nearby. The log fell, and he, the Red Army soldier, fell, but soon calmly got up and dragged his burden further. Such calmness and indifference to danger was explained, of course, not only by shelling, but also by faith. It was hard to look at the soldiers arriving from the replenishment. They looked very exhausted. Overcoats hung on them like on hangers. However, we and in those winter days not only defended, but also made sensitive blows to Hitlerites, destroyed their living force. We can cite many facts of courage and heroism of our fighters. I recall such an episode. An enemy shell damaged the communication line between the left and right bank. Sergeant Trushnev went out to repair the damage on the river ice. Having noticed him, Hitlerites opened machine gun fire. Not paying attention to the whistling of bullets, the sergeant found the break and started to splice the wires, but at that time he was wounded in the... Then the signalman clamped the ends of the wires in his teeth. The second bullet burned his neck. The sergeant repaired the damage by working with one healthy arm. At the last moment, a third bullet dug into his leg, bleeding. The hero crawled to the left bank. His comrades were already rushing to his aid. Crossing the Neva on ice became incomparably more simple than a boat crossing, though there were no easy routes and safe places not only on the patch, but also on the right bank of the Neva. I also remembered another incident that excited and angered us. From the front of the 169th Rifle Regiment, a boy was brought to the division headquarters who had crossed the ice of the Neva from the enemy's side. He was about 10 to 12 years old. He told that he had been sent by a German officer. Why this scoundrel needed to send a child under bullets, under mortar fire, at first we did not understand, and then we guessed. It turns out that Hitler's Oberleutnant simply wanted to check in such a monstrous way the state of our minefields at the edge of the coast. That's why they put a heavy duffel bag on the boy, thin and light. We immediately strengthened the minefields and combat guards along the entire line of defense, and especially in the area of the passage of the teenager. Not much time passed, I do not remember, the same night or the next, and on our mines in this area blew up an enemy scout. Thus, the fascist idea of using a child to scout minefields turned against themselves. I should add that the rogue fascist demanded that the boy go back after inspecting our positions and threatened that otherwise they would shoot his mother. What could be more terrible than enemy arbitrariness against civilians?